There's a striking passage in the book that I'm going to ask you to read, and it comes early in the book on page 22, and it's striking in the sense that it told me how tough this place was, how little one was allowed to get away with by way of daydreaming, by way of imagining that there's an easy way out. And it turned Orlando, for me in a particular, I saw him quite differently after this. And you know the passage I mean. He's been talking to you about various, he's just sat on a jury where he helped send a lot of young African-American men to prison for drug dealing. The jury, so it was a grand jury, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that summer he was the foreman of the grand jury.
And a series of cases, and as much as he wished these young men were at Rice, they weren't. And they had committed crimes that were detrimental to the community, to say the least. And then this woman comes to visit him. A knock on the office door pulls Orlando back to the present tense. If you could start there.
A knock at the office door pulls Orlando back to the present tense. He rises with noticeable effort, then directs the mother of a prospective sophomore to the couch along the wall opposite his desk. Orlando asks her why she wants her son to attend Rice. The woman responds with a lengthy monologue about violence at public schools. Orlando asks about the young man's grades, to which the mother, apologizing for her son's mediocre performance, blaming it on gang activity. We've been talking for 20 minutes now, Orlando finally says with obvious exasperation, and you haven't asked one question about our academic program. I know safety is an important concern these days, but Rice High School was not built for the sole purpose of protecting your son. Orlando pauses to give the woman a chance to respond, but she's dumbfounded. I'm not going to waste your money, he continues. Clearly Rice is not the right school for your son. You need to get your priorities in order before enrolling him here. The woman's face registers dismay, and she begins to protest. Orlando stands and directs her curtly back to the foyer, then closes the door sharply behind her.
That's tough love.
Yeah.
It's tough something.
Well, it's a combination of things. I mean, he could be immensely compassionate, but also very, very hard. And he would also say, look, in this neighborhood, African-American boys and men, one mistake and you're dead. So there was a sense of you have to get across to students that they have to make choice on this path, and it is a very narrow path. And that to be on it in a half-hearted sort of way, it will not work out. The other part of it was he kind of ran everything as a sort of consequence and counseling mode. That particular point probably wasn't in a very good mood. But, but I mean, if 1 second late for school, the bell goes off, you get a detention. Don't bring your books to class, you get a detention. So it was a kind of an intense broken windows approach to behavior in school, which focused kids on the little things, and they never did any of the big things. But it also set the stage so that they actually could learn something, because there was, the school ran smoothly. And it allowed for the other side to come out, because if a student was acting out, if the student was repeatedly late or anything like that, it always signaled a problem. So if someone was breaking the rules, something's going on. Yeah, and it's often a very, severe sort of thing. Dad got arrested, best friend got shot dead, that sort of thing. So then Orlando or the dean would pull the student aside, find out, and counsel the student how to deal with it. Sometimes an intervention would be needed, but often it's that's life. You're dealing with a brother getting shot. These things are happening all the time. How do you deal with it, and how? And still, you see, the students. There was always a punishment. There was always a consequence, regardless of why someone did something, because he was very, very committed to getting the students to understand you have to be completely responsible for your behavior, regardless of circumstances. You're up against a lot in the world, and you just have to perform in the right way. And then, of course, the other side of it was, and the students never complained about that, as long as somebody was listening and helping them get through it. So those two things were together. There was one guidance counselor per grade, and there's only 330 students. There was a big effort on the school's part to do both.
Can you talk about some of the successes? We talked about one, some of the young men. Now, 90%, is it 90% of those who complete Rice, who go through all 4 years, or is it 3 years?
4 years.
It's all 4 years, go to college or the military.
Well, it's always 99 or 100% of
99.
those who stay graduate and get into college.
How many drop out along the way, and where does that happen? Freshman year?
In university?
No, I'm not talking about university. Within Rice.
Well, typically, grades 10 and 11 is where you get the big dropout. You know, grade 9, high school is this new big deal, and then for them, the distance between the end of grade 9 and end of grade 12 is forever. And they have a lot of time. There's a lot of, well, you'll lose a certain number at the beginning of the 9th grade because all of a sudden there's rules and there's structure and there's demands and you have to have your homework in on time, you get 0, and these sorts of things. And coming out of sorts of schools that never demand that, there's rebellion, and some students choose not to, or purposely fail out because they just don't want to buy into it. In the 10th and 11th grade, just the constant adhering to rules and doing homework in an environment where most of their friends are out playing basketball as soon as they get out of school, and nobody brings home books and that sort of thing. So there's always the peer influence.
So, but what percent, if 100 kids say go into
that varied greatly from year to year. I mean, for over periods of time.
Class, yeah.
They would probably lose anywhere from 25% to 40%. But again, it's a transient population too. So families break up, collapse, reform. So you get a certain percentage. They're not dropping out. Yeah. Dad's gone. They got to go over here. A certain percentage can't continue to pay tuition. Occasionally, some will fail out. But
talk about, if you will, some of those, maybe a couple of the students who succeeded and how this happened.
Well, Linwood is a great example because he was not a gifted student. He was. He's not that he is not intelligent. He actually is quite intelligent, but academics he just doesn't. He really had to work hard. And as I say, he got into this is a young man whose father was arrested between 60 and 70 times as he went through school, in and out of jail.
His father was a drug dealer?
Well, his father was OG,
okay.
Original gangster.
Right.
One of. But anyway, he in Linwood took this very, like all the boys. They, when these things happen, they're torn apart and act out in school. I mean, so throughout grade school, at the public school, they're trying to constantly shove him into special ed, put him on Ritalin, all kinds of things. So he had these smarts to want to go to Rice, struggled with the rules, got through, got to Hofstra in a program where they give minority students coming out of neighborhoods like that an extra year. So they'll fund them for 5 years to do 4 years because there's a lot of remedial they still have to do. And he's got that work ethic. And he's a handsome young man, but he went there and he said, you know what, I'm going to work. I'm not going to fool around too much. He did his work. Of course, his mother would have killed him if he didn't, but that's a different story. But he did his work. He graduated, got into a program at Bank of America. He worked several years, and now he's in Atlanta, working for Wells Fargo. Owns his own house in Atlanta, but interestingly, now he's not Catholic, and but his tuition was paid for by a student sponsor partnership, which is a private voucher program. The minute he graduated from university, he signed up as a sponsor to the same program, and started paying for a young man to go through. And he formed Harlem Mentors, which is a mentoring thing to help young people in similar circumstances match up with someone like him who grew up in the project. So, and he's doing that with Kawan. And if you read the book, Kawan Williams is another young man, very intelligent but underperformed in high school. And he and Linwood hated each other. Total opposite personalities. Right now, they work together on this mentoring thing. And Kawan, who also is not Catholic, is now an assistant principal at a Catholic elementary school in
Can I ask you
Bronx.
a question that occurred to me 100 times when I read this book? how could you keep from interfering in the trajectory of these young men's lives? Hearing, seeing these things, knowing what you knew, having the resources you had, how could you not begin to act as a player and not an observer?
Well, sometimes you do act as a player. You're a human being, and these are young people, and some people, occasionally you'll kind of say something, like maybe that's not such a good idea hanging out with these gang guys, But for the most part, when you go into a situation like that, people start play for the camera to a certain extent,
Right.
as you're there as a reporter. But I'm writing a book, not an article next week, and that for them is they just totally lose track of that. It's coming out years later, so they just don't care. So in a sense, their big concern was whether I was really there spying on them for the principal. And when I got through, when they realized
Kind
that,
of an expensive way to do that.
yeah, when they figured that out, then they would pretty well be themselves. I mean, after a while, people just, I think act. I think to a certain extent, when someone's in the room, there is an influence. You do have an influence, but they tend to do. Over time, I think I thought that students were just more and more natural and honest about issues that they were struggling with and what they were doing. They didn't really hide much.
Clearly, they didn't, judging
No.
from some of these.
Well, and I asked after I wrote the book, do you mind all this stuff about your family? And the response I always got was no. That's my story, and from the families too. I sent everything to Linwood's family and his father, who, was out of jail by that point. No, they want their lives borne witness to, and they're not. It's not about embarrassment. It's about the integrity of their lives and their struggle and trying to help other people.
Sure. I want to give the audience a chance to get in, but I want to go to a couple of things before that. The first study of Catholic schools in this kind of new urban relationship, that is, without the great urban Catholic populations that are now in Newton and Framingham and no longer partaking of the archdiocesan offerings, was by a guy, James Coleman, in 1982. Right. And he said, quote, "The social systems associated with schools matter a great deal for the values and aspirations of students." And that's, to your point, the social systems at Rice were profound in terms of guiding these students. They learned how to work with these social systems, and after that, I won't say things were easy, but once you knew the rules, it was easier to be a learner. Well, the counter response to that has always been, well, public schools have to take everybody, and Rice doesn't. We had that example with that little story. This kid wasn't rejected because he was acting out or something like that. That clearly didn't bother the admissions people at Rice, because they brought in a lot of kids who acted out. But it was kind of a, off-the-cuff kind of rejection,
right,
which you can't do in a public school setting. You're an advocate for what Catholic schools can do, or what the Catholic school system can do for inner city, for minority kids in impoverished cities. How do you respond to that? Well, that's easy for you. You take who you want. I have to take every single kid who lives in the district.
Well, public schools do, in a sense, have to take everyone, but they have so much more resources to deal with it. Economists looking at that wait for that sort of thing in their studies, and Derek Neal has done a number of big studies, and still come out with the conclusion that despite these sorts of things, Catholic schools do make a big difference. But public schools, there's a lot of things public schools could do and choose not to deal with this sort of thing. Why are students an issue in the first place? If you talk to, I recently wrote an article about Catholic schools in Memphis, interviewed a grandmother who had a couple of grandchildren in a Catholic school, and she marched with Martin Luther King and talked about what public schools were like when she went to Memphis public schools. There was order and discipline and very poor environment and real prejudice going on, but those schools function well as public schools. And today, it's an unmitigated disaster. You know, there are a lot of things that public schools have dropped and could do to deal with the fact that, yes, they have to take everybody. It's also true that they don't have to take everybody and put them wherever those kids want to go. I mean, they do have all kinds of alternative schools and whatever to take the worst behaving kids and sort of quarantine them in all these different sorts of things. I don't really buy that as much of an excuse. They have all kinds of ways they do and could deal with it better.